Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thanks for joining us in this episode of BRM Brown Bag. This is episode number 37 with Suresh GP. I'm your host. We bring in real world practitioners who share their insights on their BRM journey. And what a way to get kick started today with Julie Cursi joining us from Pittsburgh. She's a business relationship management manager with KLN Gates, and she has been in the higher ed space as a business relationship manager. And we thought to get her insights of the journey that she has traversed through and get some nuggets of wisdom. So thank you, Julie, for taking time today and being with us in this episode of BRM Brown Bag. I'm hoping that you're doing well and enjoying the new role with KLN Gates as well.
Thank you, Suresh. It's my pleasure. I absolutely am enjoying the role at KNL Gates, and I'm always thrilled to talk about my BRM journey from higher ed too.
Awesome. So let's, for the viewers, just give us a little bit of a rundown memory lane from the way that you started off and you were in the higher ed for a long period of time. And I call you as a veteran in the industry. So give us a little bit of a part of, and you've done different roles, being an engagement manager and business relationship manager. Things have evolved over a period of time. So just give us a journey from how did you go to become a business relationship manager? How was the journey all about? And because from the time you started off to what you are today, things have changed in various dimensions. So
Mhm.
give us a little bit of a sense of the journey and what attracted you to this world of business relationship management.
Sure. It's really the story starts when I was actually a communications manager.
Sure.
And believe it or not, that is really what kicked it off. I had a great boss, and this is still in higher ed, University of Pittsburgh. I worked in an area of the university called financial operations. It was strictly the financial side, not the academic side. And I was their communications manager. As luck would have it, a lot of the communications revolved around bringing in new technology, especially new financial technology. I had a great boss, a very dynamic boss that really wanted to take the university to a new level,
Right.
bringing in a lot of financial technology, Concur, travel technology. And for a university, those are heavy lifts,
Right.
and there's a lot of grassroots. You have to get a lot of buy-in. So I learned so much from her in my communications role about politics, about how you need to communicate change. And I also worked in lockstep with IT because these were technologies being brought in.
Sure.
Even though I worked in financial operations, I did not work in IT. I partnered with IT constantly. And through my work with IT, eventually they actually asked me to come over. And at the time, I came over in an agile, a Scrum Master communication kind of capacity. I managed dev projects, so forth and so on. And I want to mention that because I want to make a point about that in a couple of minutes that kind of leads also to BRM. But I moved over to IT. I took the leap and I found so many amazing opportunities in project management and communications and kind of bringing it all together. And one day my boss said, I've been reading about business relationship management. This is back in 2017.
Right.
So this is quite a few years ago. He said, I've been reading a lot about BRM, business relationship management, through Gartner, through Heller, et cetera. If you have a really good communications manager, I want you to go to this conference and see what you think. So
Right.
I went to a BRM Connect conference,
Right.
and that was back in 2017.
Was it in
And
Washington, D.C.? Or was it, I think
yeah,
2017 was
it
Washington, D.C.
was, it was, yes, it was DC with the Ferris wheel and everything.
Right.
That was my very first conference. Um, and I had been a little bit jaded to conferences up until that point. I never really went to one that I liked,
Right.
but I walked into this BRM Connect conference and immediately it was the most inviting, helpful. I've never seen so many executives want to kind of like take you under their wing and tell you what it's all about and how well it works and their story, the skepticism and the revelation that it works so well in their companies. And so many trainers, and I just met so many people right away. And I was able to go into all of the seminars, and I was just documenting and documenting. It just clicked with me.
Right.
And the communications management, even the Scrum mastery, it all came together and it made so much sense. And the rest of my colleagues back in IT, they didn't have an interest. And I think that's probably because they didn't have the same type of communications background and
Right.
didn't really care about as much.
Right.
Because when you see as a communications person is that gap, you're always reminded of that gap. And I've been on the other side of IT so long, and that's where it's like, oh, this is the solution to that frustrating gap that we all have. We
Right.
ask IT, or we are in IT, and we don't understand each other. Like IT thinks the business is silly sometimes, and the business says, like, why did you give me this? It doesn't work. It's like, well, that's because you asked for it. And it's this age-old dilemma that I walked in right away realizing that, oh my gosh, this can be fixed. And
Right.
it can be fixed in ways in which I already almost have a background, and
Right.
this training is really going to get us there. So I documented everything, brought it back to my boss. My boss was very heavy into metrics. He's like, okay, let's do this, but we have to prove the value. Otherwise,
Right.
we won't be able to do it very long.
Right.
And so that's kind of like that was a very small IT department that served just the financial side of the University of Pittsburgh.
Right.
We started doing BRM on a very small scale. We had a lot of disgruntled business units that we needed to iron things out with anyway. We started to see successes there. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy a lot. We got a lot of stiff arms, but with patience and listening and time, we really were able to make some ground, and we started to get a lot of good testimonials. And then small IT merged with our central IT, and we had to scale it up. Um, and so that was a little bit of an interruption on the day-to-day like interaction with businesses, because we had to do a lot of frameworking, and that took about a year of absence from the business unit sphere.
Right.
We weren't really engaging. We were working on a framework that was literally 10 times larger than what we had before
Right.
in central IT. We had to expand it out to the entire university. We also had to expand it out to adapt to the academic side, which is a lot different of an animal than the financial side. Um, and we did it. And it was, it definitely, the size difference came with a lot of challenges, um, and different executive leadership ideas of what it should be. Should it be customer centric? Should we start using those words, customer and servicing? Things that kind of like make it difficult vocabulary wise to really pull off the strategic nature of what BRM is, to really make those partnerships. But we were able to make a lot of good headway. It wasn't perfect, and we didn't have a perfect level of executive support there, but where we were able to create avenues and roadways, we did. And so that was kind of like a fast forward from 2017 all the way up to 2025.
Right.
I've only been out of higher ed for a little over a month, so most all of my experience is still from there. And so it was a journey from it was just an idea to, hey, this can work, until it really morphed into an excellent discipline that a lot of folks at higher ed, business units and IT alike, really started to respect, because IT was getting the attention they needed too.
Sure.
It's kind of like IT was in a vacuum. Like, we don't know what people are saying and what they want. And the business units, same situation, like IT never gives us what we really need. It's like, well, that's because you're explaining things that aren't making, that we're not looking at strategy here. We're literally giving you what you're asking for, and it's not working. And
Right.
so in many, many cases, it really we were able to generate good metrics that kept us on the table. We were able to change the attitude toward IT into more of a partnership, not in every case. The university has 45 um, responsibility centers, and that's literally like 45 separate businesses.
Right.
That the mindsets are different. The level of adoption of this philosophy is different in each and every one of them. So we really had to bend and adapt to each of those 45 different areas. Some the demand maturity is very low too. So you don't have a big opportunity to do a lot of partnering, but you can still keep that door open and make sure they're being heard. Um, we were really like decided to, go on listening campaigns where there were chunks of RCs that we didn't really have the capacity to do business relationship management with. Once we finally were able to make the time, it was literally we start from the ground on a listening campaign. So that's kind of like getting into the process. But that's the journey. A couple of great bosses that let me do some really interesting work that led to this is a real passion for me now. I'll never forget when my boss sent me to the conference. It started everything, and I love it. I love the field, the discipline, and regardless of what your organization decides to do, it's still part of you, and you can still enact all of those skills in your day to day and your, relationship building and in some cases relationship repairing, and just to making sure that you're listening to people all the time and capturing what they're saying, sometimes silently, and those random conversations can bloom into really great, big, long-term, like 5-year long-term opportunities. And I've
Awesome.
seen that, and it's been very rewarding.
Awesome. And I think I love the passion that you have as a communication specialist, very clearly articulative about the whole structure and do that. And it's also very therapeutic, isn't it? When you look at business relationship management, it's not just about communications, but communication with that level of empathy, putting ourselves into that shoes and saying that, how can I help you? A lot of times people have this notion that they don't ask for help because they think if I ask for help, it is a sign of weakness. But in
Mhm.
reality, it's just about supporting each other. And sometimes your ego gets hurt if I want to reach out to someone else. So how do you kind of play that one, subtly to do that becomes very important in the way you do it. So, question to you is, let's say you're building a relationship. We talk about our relationship maturity model from being an ad hoc order taker, service provider to up to a strategic partner. But when you start with some relationship between departments, between functions, how do you establish the baseline for new relationships? Which relationship do you think we should be spending the most amount of time? Because everybody wants your attention. So you only have
Exactly.
limited time. So how do you place out of how to establish baseline for relationships and where do we need to focus our efforts? What's been your journey with that?
So the journey it gets a little bit complicated because of course what we want to do is meet with the executive levels and establish that relationship from the top.
Right.
However, and we, I'll give a really good example. It's kind of like you definitely what I had to do in order to really make a difference, because in my organization, the executive levels of people that was they would I definitely needed to build the relationship there to get their buy-in. But that's kind of where it ended. So relationship building with a brand new RC at the university kind of involved like this tagging along. Our CIO was great about like kind of kicking that door open, so to speak. So I would use that as leverage. I would kind of like any kind of like introduction our CIO would make to the executive levels, or in a university, it's like the dean levels of a responsibility center, or the C-suite over on the executive side. I would kind of tag on to that email or that message or post meeting and say, this is what we've been talking about. I'd love to meet with you and hear what your situation is like, what your kind of vision is, and how whether we're meeting it or not, or whether IT is driving, kind of like get in the door, letting them know that we're going to come in and listen.
Right.
And of course, lots of people, especially at that level, they don't have time a
Yeah.
lot unless they're a little aggravated about something. And then when you say you're going to listen, they kind of open that door. So that's the way I got in front of our leadership, our senior leadership at the university. And that worked really well because they weren't used to getting that kind of attention. And literally, it was just giant ears and hardly any mouth at the very beginning. And then listening for those key kind of like, it's like, oh, you're having an issue with an implementation that you got 15 years ago that's they're going out of business. You're not going to be able to patch it and make this work. And it's kind of like in the course of a half-hour conversation, a couple of key things that I could act on right away. Those were my most successful relationship building efforts. When I could get in behind the CIO,
Correct.
that door was still open a little bit, do nothing but listen, take some notes, and then act right away. And so that second part of acting involved directors and managers, not the executive levels. And um, I that actually was very successful because it went back up. And so one I tried one thing that was a big hit, and I don't know if it would be a big hit everywhere, but it worked really well for me in higher ed, is that I did virtual whiteboarding. Like I would listen to the pain point and the gain points from executive leadership, get their approval to go ahead and start meeting with their directors and managers. And then once I got that, and then I would often get, we would call it a win. The win would be the cadence, right? Because for busy people, if you win a cadence, that means you're actually doing something that they want, they're interested in, because
Right.
they can't get on their calendars easily. Once I won that cadence and won the opportunity to go and meet with the directors and managers, the very first thing I would do is have a virtual whiteboard session. And I used Miro to do that. And I did it that way because I really appreciate the rule of facilitation, being the guide, not the hero, and letting both extroverts and introverts, giving them a complete platform for them to communicate. um, Extroverts are always going to communicate. Introverts have, they want to be able to put a post-it up anonymously. And so this board does that. So literally, if you wanted to shout me down in this meeting, you could absolutely do that if you're an extreme extrovert. And if you kind of just wanted to get your opinions in there without your colleagues knowing, or just you want to get this off your chest, and it really worked. And at the end of it, so we would have a whiteboarding session, gain points, pain points. Gain points are always the icebreaker, right? It's just kind of like people really don't show up to say, oh, I love how you do this. So I kind of used it as the icebreaker. What's working really well?
Right.
But they would say that, and those are things we would keep. And then the rest of the meeting was, what's not so well. And people that didn't want to really identify themselves would just put all kinds of post-it notes up. So would the extroverts. They would talk a little bit. I would make their notes for them. The cool thing about Miro is that at the end of that, you can let people vote on the things that are most relevant to them. Like, what's the most important? What are the top three things on this board of 150 post-its that you think are the most important that we could tackle right away? And they did it. I mean, I wasn't the very first time I tried this, I thought this could be a flop. People might hate this. A lot of people hate whiteboarding exercises.
Right.
But when it's virtual, it's a little bit less kind of like you don't have to walk up to a whiteboard and do anything, and you can do a lot of things
But it's
anonymous.
less
So
intimidating to say that I need
exactly,
to do that. Right.
exactly. And to take it to a vote, and that worked. And when I say baselining, we would really narrow it down to a few of the highest, hottest issues they had and tackle them so that when I would meet with their executives, I could show progress. It's like, this is what your organization has identified as a problem. And there was usually quite a bit of agreement there.
Right.
Um, or if there is an agreement, that's something the BRM has to know right away. Like,
Right.
oh, your leadership here doesn't agree that we should replace this system.
Sure.
So now we're going to have to do something different, but we're still going to have to alleviate the pain point caused by it. So really, in terms of baselining and metrics and the ability to set the stage for like an entire year or two of of opportunities. Like you
Right.
could have like five things that you can focus on and generate value because you're solving those issues in any way that you can, and you're also ensuring that there's agreement between leadership. One thing, and it might happen anywhere. It happened a lot in higher ed. One thing that BRM sometimes would, try to like, there's a lot of conflict in the business unit a lot of times, a lot of disagreement there. And then sometimes we want to be put into the role of the bad cop. Well, you tell that side that that's not going to work, kind of a thing. And that open and frank initial whiteboarding session kind of clears all of that stuff out. And then there's a nice pipeline between executive leadership and middle management, and
Mm.
they really can make some progress and get some things on the table, get some RFI, the whole thing, whether it's buying something new, whether it's just fixing a table stakes kind of lights on problem in a lot of cases, depending on the maturity level. It's mixed at the university. Sometimes you have the ad hoc, and sometimes you're already at a three and you can go higher from there. It's all over the board. But I will say that one of the most memorable things is how effective it was to get approval to go ahead and have these big whiteboarding sessions. And it could be like 70, 80, 100 people in these from areas, and especially in research, just really shaping what the entire situation is and what they would like to do going forward. And you can almost extrapolate strategy out of that. In some cases, they're not willing to talk strategy. They're not willing to say, this is my 3 or 5 year plan. They're trying to say, look, I'm busy every day. I'm glad I can get up in the morning and do what I have to do. You're
Right.
asking me for a 3 or 5 year strategy. It's not happening. But by those whiteboarding sessions, you can kind of extrapolate and understand where they're going,
Right.
even if they don't feel like they have time to really explain that. And I found that to be an amazing tool for getting under the hood, really getting a deep understanding of what a department's all about. And then I can empathize with it. It's like, wow, you guys are trying to do this amazing research and you're running into this, and this because you have really outdated technology. We have project management and we can help you find a better solution. Because my IT department even we had project management services. So even things like RFPs, RFIs, discovery on technology out there, we had the capability of linking them with services like that. So and no one knew. People didn't know that. They didn't even know that we had a catalog of things like that. So it was a lot of connecting, which is what we're all about.
Yeah, awesome. I think this drives 2 points on that conversation that you talked about baselining. One is it looked to be like a backlog of which is more important for them, like the product backlog grooming that we generally talk about in the log or a sprint backlog grooming. That
Mhm.
is validated now not by the product owner, but by the crew itself. And guess what? They kind of get this buy-in because everybody is talking about it. So the three parts is the most easiest part to handle, and you can get lost in the plethora of this whole request or demand that is surfacing it. So you really did that great job of facilitating and putting everybody into the same page, understanding what's most important, and then driving that conversation. So I think it's a perfect way to drive that conversations more meaningfully. So that brings up to the next point. Once you identify those 3 or 4 key things that you can kind of move the needle, get quick wins, how do you document which has won, which we lost? Sometimes it's like, a game of probabilities. You kind of
It
throw that
is.
on a dart. It can strike you like a bullseye, or sometimes it can just be off the radar. So, how did we go
Mhm.
about looking at and tracking the efforts in the journey towards what's working, what's not working, what's kind of course correction that you need to make towards that destination?
Oh, sure. We actually used Salesforce, and we called it opportunities.
Right.
And so a little bit, well, before an opportunity could become an opportunity, we actually did a Gartner scoring model on it. And we would meet with the department and go through a weighted scoring based on the university's strategy, the department strategy, how viable is this? And we would give it a numeric. So say there were four things came out of the, say that four things came out of the whiteboarding. And these are things driven by the business, not necessarily IT, because I can explain the way we do the IT, put the other half of that. But to this point of the business asks, um, we would score them along with the leadership from the team, and then rank them, and their complete agreement. They're on board with this with us, and also kind of like have to schedule with the rest of our IT to make sure confirm capacity and confirm schedules. Then it would become an opportunity
Right.
that we could actually track and either push to project management or handle in other ways if it's a fix or if it's just a keeping the lights on issue, figure it out. In some cases, it was an IT staffing issue, but at any rate, we would document opportunities in Salesforce and then update it with the status. Like we would, however the cadence was, we would update on the progress and the status and whether it lost or moved forward. Because in some cases, even opportunities that scored high, we would lose if a department got different news on their budget or their grant funding, or they might get distracted and say, you know what, this is a great idea. It was at the time. It's not right now. We're going to have to parking lot this. So many different ways of losing an opportunity. Not all of them are fails. Some of them are just by matter of circumstance. But we track that in Salesforce, and we put those that information in a quarterly report. So every BRM's assignment would be tracking the opportunities and the status of, and even like when we would enter an opportunity, we would already assess like the timeline and the resources needed. And so that's tracked too. The times, like you said, that we would be at least assigning it to project management and queue, whatever, did this happen? And if it didn't, what's the delay? So we were always in front of each other and in front of our own leadership with this kind of data. And we did it all in Salesforce.
Awesome. So, as you go through this, one of the key metrics that you were talking about in our conversations is about adoption. And how did
Yes.
you ensure that the adoption was there? Because a lot of people, it's like, oh, I'm not upbeat about that. Just because someone is telling that we need to adopt towards this way of working and relationship management, some people are not there. So how do you get everybody onto the board, and what's the adoption strategy look like? And how do you make course correction for people to take them into the journey to finally reach that end goal? Because not everybody is saying, I want to jump in. A lot of people are skeptical in the initial part. So how did you go about in this adoption? Because that's a key metric that you were talking about as an important part of the success.
Very important to the university because the lack of adoption was creating a lot of that's a waste. That's sheer waste and
Right.
leakage. So we um we for an actual example I can kind of tie this to is our data modernization initiative.
Right.
And so with adoption, to put it in simple terms, the simplest like structure is that BRM comes in and identifies an opportunity and cultivates that opportunity and decides which direction that opportunity is going to go.
Right.
Say it's a project manager. This particular opportunity was enterprise-wide
Right.
data modernization, and it was mostly led by our data analytics team. Other opportunities we would like department to department, we would push to project management. Project management would take that on, implement it, and then BRM comes right up behind that after the implementation and follows because we have a cadence established with the executives and the directors and the managers. And we zero in on what's happening with that implementation. Um, and if it's not being adopted, they'll talk right away. Like, this isn't what we thought it would be. No one's using it. Everyone hates it. Nobody wants to change because it's going to take too much time to get training. So in many cases, um, without intervention from some entity like business relationship management, an implementation will just rot and not be used, or many of its features won't be used.
Right.
And it just, all that waste just sits there. And BRM actively pursues that and makes sure that, like, unless there are circumstances that force people to cut off of one system and onto the other, which in higher ed you can rarely really mandate that way.
Right.
Um, we just made sure it's like, why, what's happening? Do we need training? So we link them to training. We linked them to the vendor, create a special module for this specific situation, get people on board. What's so good about the old system that's not happening in the new system? Fix that gap. So BRM played a very active role in adoption, and we used adoption as a metric. And we had to prove that people are using it. We had to test the system, prove that people are using it. And for the example that I want to use is much bigger than BRM just, kind of turfing a departmental project over to PM. For our data modernization, that was an initiative university-wide. It wasn't being adopted. It was fiercely being contested. And so what we were doing is we were replacing a system called Cognos with Tableau and Alteryx, and making data available where it was not nearly as available before. Clean data, honest data. You can't, using Tableau, you want to be able to go in and customize reports, but you can't go in and change numbers. Um, it was very cynically viewed. It was like, no, this is never going to work, kind of a thing. So BRMs met with each of those responsibility centers, and there's where adoption became key, because without the chaperoning, it would have no one would have even looked at Tableau. We decided to use Tableau for the most part. For heavy data users, they got licensed to use Alteryx, much heavier lift. But just focusing on the Tableau group, the BRMs played a key role in kind of saving a lot of time from our data analytics team and ushering in a lot of adoption, because there was so much negative view of what this was going to be like. And we had a couple of Tableau specialists that we were able to bring into our team. They weren't business relationship managers, they were customer success managers,
Right.
but they were excellent at Tableau. And so when the changes were made with data modernization, they rolled them out RC by RC. And to get these people off of their old system was like, it was a steep effort until we put the customer success managers in front of them and literally had them say, here's Tableau, tell me what you need out of it. And they would literally walk them through the whole process. And we had so many people say, I can't believe this. This is beautiful. I thought I would hate this. This is so much easier. It saves me all kinds of steps. And IT knew that, but convincing the business of that, because it was a change that was going to require training, and it was not going to look the same as their
Right.
Cognos report at all. But when they started to work directly with customer success managers, and the BRMs were facilitating all of that and also participating in the training and in the meetings, and it wouldn't take very long. In some cases, like I would bring a CSM to a meeting with someone that was so hostile about, like, this isn't going to work. None of my stuff is here. And the Tableau specialist would, like, literally say, like, what kind of a report do you need? Do this, do this, do this. And she wouldn't just show, she would have them do it and
Right.
share their screen and say, click that, filter this, structure the Tableau report like this, and then they would see what they were getting. And it was a game changer. It changed everything. People were asking to get on, like, they were just like accelerating at that point. It's like, we want off of the old stuff. This is so much easier. It's so much cleaner. The report looks more beautiful. I don't have to worry about lines moving around. And so with adoption there, it wasn't going to be adopted unless we really got in there and said, look, like, we're going to meet with you and we're going to walk you through this. Literally, it sounds very basic, but that didn't exist before BRM existed.
Right.
no one really was in the middle to care enough to say, you have to start using this because eventually this is all you're going to have. And not to mention, it's a much more efficient tool, and your life, your day-to-day business life is going to be much better from it. I
Sure.
mean, this whole process literally saves, full time, many, many hours of staff grinding
Right.
away, creating reports and manually doing things. And we weren't really able to convey that through words until we got right in front of people and held them by the hand and walked them through it. And it literally took minutes in some cases. And for
Sure.
people to say, oh, I didn't realize that existed there and I could do all of this at once. But it was kind of like the linkage between BRM, customer success management, and the business unit. At first, their leaders, and then for the most part, the people that actually had to do this reporting, which was staff. And that won a lot of hearts. You took a lot of bitterness and turned it around a lot. And so we got a lot of really good press out of that. And we also saved data analytics as a skeleton crew. They're very brilliant people, data scientists, and they're coming up with all of this, but they don't have that skill set there that they can train people. They
Right.
don't have the people thing going. So all of those tickets would have gone to them. And then what? I mean, they're not the right people to try to help you through when you don't really want to use a product. But BRM and CSM were there to do that, and that facilitated adoption like crazy. And that's an example of an enterprise-wide solution that's being driven. It's a giant example, but there are many, many smaller examples of smaller projects that would get sent to PM, and then as soon as PM is done, again, it's not their responsibility to go and handhold after the implementation,
Right.
but because we're always meeting with our people, we were able to splice that together and get great marks for adoption. And the thing with that metric is we're documenting the adoption rate. And if it's not a full adoption rate that the leadership expected to get out of the implementation, we're working with them until it is, or until we all decide that it was a bad choice and we have to get them some other product,
Right.
or add bolt on to it to make it behave in a different way. And either way, it's pretty much it's tracked like a constant. um, and that was a really important thing for the university. And I think adoption really is a very important thing so that you're efficiently using your products.
Awesome. I think that's a good example of looking at the data modernization and how we can pull these people, but also helping them through this journey. So, in terms of
Mhm.
metrics, what kind of metrics? One is the adoption, that is an important metric. What other metrics? How did you go about showing the value? If you remember the first time the boss talked to you, what value are we going to create? And sometimes it's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, you are making sure that you're optimizing the risk, you're calling out things, and you're educating your business partners so that they're not stranded halfway around. But what's the kind of hard metrics or a soft metrics that will help them qualify that BRM is adding value and making a difference, be it engagement manager or relationship manager or a customer success manager? How do you kind of focus on some of the key metrics?
Well, we really leaned on the maturity metric that BRM publishes.
Right.
We lean, and I don't mean to say that in past tense. We really leaned on that and still do. And I love the descriptors in the BRM maturity metric
Right.
because there's no question, and you can come up with your own numeric. I mean, we made increments that were smaller than 1 through 5,
Right.
and really we set a bar that was achievable. Excuse me. Metric was the maturity metric. The second thing that we used is the nature of the tickets coming in, especially on a newer implementation. Are those table stake type, like, oh, we missed the mark and people can't even log in? Or, are they, what kind of are they? If they're tedious tickets and they're happening over and over again,
Right.
um, that's something that we can fix and mature. So the maturity metric, the nature of the tickets. Um, Hold on one second. I have a cheat sheet because I don't
Sure.
want to miss. Oh, okay. Yes, ticket types and persistence, measurements based on the BRM maturity model, which I just said, adoption rates and survey results.
Right.
Those were our packet of four. Most, I think, publicized was the maturity metric because it was easiest to show on a quarterly report where the mentality was, where the sentiment was last quarter versus this quarter. And we had to be honest about that. And sometimes it didn't change, or it got worse, or it got better and then slid back a little bit. But it's it shows how that cultivation process works.
Right.
Survey results were also a pretty important factor in it, and we kind of designed those survey results around adoption and around presence of a business relationship manager, around the maturity level without actually saying that, kind of like questions that will elicit where are you in the IT process? How do you feel about your partnership with IT? And the way they would answer that, we would adjust that on a quarterly basis to determine, are we making an impact here? Are we listening well enough? Is this person, this business leader, getting value, and our own IT leaders getting value out of this, because we're clarifying things on the IT side, and we're also um, a big thing with IT, obviously, is capacity and understanding it, and not going out and selling things or trying to create opportunities when we don't have the capacity to deliver. Of course, that's a terrible fail.
Right.
And so some of those metrics were coming from IT as well, IT leadership, like, are you able to help us when we get in trouble on a mandatory initiative like a Windows 11 upgrade, for example? Are you able to get in front of this and explain to people it's going to take several hours of downtime on their laptop, or things like that? Or are you saving us time? And do we have consistent messaging so that the expectations are being managed correctly, and we're not just going out there trying to create opportunities that the rest of IT has no time to do, because that's just a colossal disappointment. A lot of that came out of the survey data on both sides,
Mm.
both IT and business. And then adoption rates we recorded in the opportunities section in Salesforce. Ticket types and presence, the same type of thing. Ticket types and persistence, I meant to say. And then the health measurements on BRM was kind of a manual process that we did in SharePoint with graphs. And it's like this group was at maturity level X, and this is why. We would explicitly explain that so that we weren't just throwing arbitrary numbers around.
Right.
Um, and where the relationship was good enough, we got agreement on that maturity metric from the department as well. Kind of like, this is where we are. That was the best case scenario, is when the relationship is good enough. It might not be mature yet, but
Right.
it's good enough and trusting enough for both sides to talk openly about that metric and the number, and what we both want to do to move that number higher and be more strategic together. So we
Awesome.
relied on that a lot.
The final thought would be, as you go through this journey of building that business relationship management as a discipline, as a capability, you would have seen some do's and don'ts. So, if I ask you, what are some of those do's and don'ts that you would want to keep in mind, particularly when you go through the journey? Because a lot of our viewers are looking at the secret sauce, right? What we should be doing, not doing, what are some of the pitfalls that we are well prepared, because once you're well prepared, you're able to handle this with ease. So, based on your experience, what would you suggest as do's and don'ts in this particular journey?
Sure, there are. At the very beginning, I got very. I thought that the vocabulary was very important, and it is, and I still think it is. Like not using the word customer, not using the word service. And I really try to live and die by that. But then the culture, the environment of each organization is so entrenched, and it takes forever to kind of scrub those words and those terminologies out of the whole experience.
Right.
And so I kind of softened up on that. And really, there were about 5 do's and don'ts that I really paid attention to. The first one, track metrics, but only for your own planning. So do track metrics for your own and to kind of prove your value in your own hierarchy, your own organization, IT, your IT leadership. Definitely track metrics for your own planning, but don't talk about the metrics to the business unit or unless they want to,
Mm.
unless they want to get granular and numeric, and then you have it in your back pocket. You always have it, but the conversations with the business leaders shouldn't be about that. It should just more like be just regular conversation. What's life like? What's your life like? And then the IT part will roll into it, and their business visions will also roll into it by nature. Um, the second thing is do ensure table stakes are being met, because if you're not, the basics aren't being met, you can't go up the ladder at all. And I actually had a leader tell me that at Pitt before. They're like, you want to have a cadence with me and you want to have this partnership, and I'll tell you what, you can't even keep my laptop operational. So where do we go from here?
Sure.
So do ensure that table stakes are being met, but don't get into the weeds yourself.
Right.
All that has to be done behind the scenes.
Right.
And a person who knows a person kind of thing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the conversation will be mired down into it, and you just
That's
perceive
Yeah, that's basically like single
that.
point of contact to single point of focus. Like I know what
Exactly.
you're talking about, but I have someone else to fix it rather than I fixing it by self, right?
Exactly, exactly. But definitely ensure that that stuff gets cleaned up, because every time you darken their door, that's going to be on their mind if that's still a pain point. So, um, and then definitely build relationships with business and IT. And I noticed this, I'm doing that in this conversation as well. I focus so much on the business because I was born on the business side, not IT.
Right.
So it's easy for me to focus on the business. And I often neglect IT, but it's just as important to have those relationships built with leaders of operations, enterprise applications, security, analytics. It's just as important to cultivate just as much and with just as much mindfulness and with the big ears and a small mouth as is on the business, because you really do have to understand the entire world of IT, not the technical parts of it, but the circumstances and especially the capacity in order to be that partner for the business. So build relationships with business and IT, and definitely don't neglect IT relationships.
Mm.
Um, and then there are two left. Strive for equal commitment. Um, and so, and here's where the vocabulary comes in. If you can help it, and if you can get away with it, don't refer to business partners as customers or IT products as services. Because, when at my very first BRM meeting, I went to a seminar, and the first thing that was said was, if you call your business units customers and your product services, you are nothing more than a service station.
Right.
And I really took that to heart. And I believe that. I believe it. It's a mountain climb to try to change the vocabulary in a culture. And I have tried to kind of like minimize that and not pay quite as much of attention to it, because it's colossally hard
Right.
to take those words out of the picture. But if you can, just refer to partnerships and products, like not customers and services, because that just indicates a whole different relationship, right?
Yeah.
And finally, thoroughly understand the business's values. And conversely, from what I said a few minutes ago, don't look always through, solely look through IT eyes, because that's where you get back to, they asked for a PDF, and really they needed a complete user interface and something online kind of a thing. So don't always give people what they ask. Don't always look through the lens of IT just to make someone happy. Definitely, look from the business sense. Is this product, is what we're doing going to help this person 6 months, 3 years from now, or is it going to be a nightmare? And just because they're asking for it, you're going to give it to them so that they'll go away, kind of thing. And really, that's mostly the do's and don'ts that I think of on a daily basis. And it's difficult. It's difficult to always adhere to that, but when you can, it definitely works much better.
Awesome. The final
People
question
understand, the business unit understands your role much better. Sorry, Suresh, I didn't mean
uh,
to interrupt you.
no, absolutely. So, and it was great insights on the do's and don'ts. So, finally, to wrap up, my question would be, what's the future of BRM look like with all AI coming in picture? Some people are terrified whether we'll all have jobs, and a lot of these things are happening in every different firms that we are looking at it. So what do you think is the future of business relationship management from your perspective? You have been a championing this cause. You have seen the results coming through. You're making a difference to the community as well as to your organization. So where is it heading to, and what should people be, anyone who wants to step into the world of business relationship management, are they still having opportunities to flourish? What's your take?
100%. I think in my new organization, we're hiring BRMs,
Right,
and I think AI is setting it on fire in a
right,
brilliant way. I just attended the BRM toolkit
right.
um,
Webinar.
meetings, and well, let me back up just a minute. And I'm a firm believer, and I'm going to steal someone's quote. I don't know who said it first, but the person who said it this way: AI is not going to take your job, but the person who knows it will.
Correct.
And in BRM, I have been leaning on, the more basic forms of artificial intelligence, Perplexity, Claude. I mean, they have they have allowed me to do so much more quickly and understand. I've been able to do benchmarking with it at lightning speed.
Right,
And especially the ones that, like Perplexity, cites every source, so you don't have to worry about it hallucinating or anything like that. Of course, always have to double check and make sure, but there's so much muscle there that fuels the efforts of BRM, so that as a BRM, you don't have to get bogged down into days, weeks, hours of research. The RFI process is much easier. Benchmarking is much quicker. Just getting those initial starts on anything, getting to know your business units. I mean, with certain AI products, it sets BRM on fire. I would say there's nothing to worry about, and there's everything to gain through artificial intelligence. And conversely, it's not conversely, but in the same vein, it's important to study it and take classes and know it really well, because your business units are going to want it. And
right,
they have to understand, in any particular organization, the security situation. How much are they allowed to put out there? How much is proprietary that they don't want other language models learning off of their unpatented and information that's proprietary?
correct.
Certain cautions need to take place, and as a BRM, we have to understand what those are within our organization and guide our business units through that so that they get the maximum out of AI without risking any of their proprietary information, and kind of like locking that down a little bit. The business definitely needs guidance through AI. And I think the best thing a BRM can do is get as much in education from a business level in AI as possible, so that you can be a great guide to the folks out there, and also use it in the profession, because it's a great way to get to know business units and do benchmarking and all kinds of other things that BRMs need to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julie, for spending some valuable time providing us some detailed nuggets of wisdom and some practitioner insight on the relationship management. I'm 100% sure that viewers have enjoyed your passion, your energy, and the conversation was very inspirational. I hope that more people get inspired to take action as a BRM, but also making an impact to the organization. But at the end of the day, it's two words: how to create value and impact your organization. So thank you so much for your time today. And I hope that we will be able to continue these conversations as we go through it. But really, a great, I love the session. There's a lot of information that I need to kind of soak in and process and digest it. But our viewers can see it through the YouTube channel as well as going through Google, Spotify, or Apple Podcast and listen at ease. But a phenomenal session, and thank you so much for enlightening us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Suresh.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the session. So we look forward to seeing you in our next episode of BRM Brownback. Until then, subscribe to this channel, make sure that you're following on things, and ensure that you continue the conversations and become better BRMs in the world of AI.